Ed's got a scrumptious new take on hot cross buns.
Oh, this is seriously good.
On New Better Homes, Friday on 7.
This morning, battling the virus, the new restrictions on non-essential businesses, along with the limited numbers now allowed at weddings and funerals. Australian Border Force slams New South Wales Health for allowing coronavirus-infected passengers to disembark from a cruise ship. And delaying the Olympics, Tokyo 2020 is now officially Tokyo 2021.
This is 7 News with Ann Sanders.
Good morning. Australian life radically changed again overnight as the Prime Minister announced a new raft of measures restricting gatherings and movement in a bid to slow the coronavirus. There's now a total ban on overseas travel. Businesses deemed non-essential will close from midnight. New restrictions on weddings and funerals and outdoor exercises. Australians told to stay home whenever possible. We're being warned a total lockdown will be unavoidable unless these strict new measures to contain the coronavirus are taken seriously. Live to Olivia Leamy in Canberra. Good morning, Olivia. The Prime Minister will address the nation shortly. We'll go to that when it happens. But run us through the new restrictions announced overnight.
Well, and not only now is travelling overseas illegal, but many Australians who had a job just yesterday now do not. After a national cabinet meeting last night, the Prime Minister confirmed more businesses must close to stop the virus spreading. Real estate auctions are now banned, along with open homes and food courts. Beauty salons must shut, as well as play centres, museums, libraries and RSLs. Funerals will be limited to just 10 people and weddings to 5. While hairdressers must limit appointments to 30 minutes, though shopping centres will stay open and restaurants and cafes will still serve takeaway. Australians now urged to stay home as much as possible, to work from home if they can, with no more large social gatherings. Measures the Prime Minister says are crucial to saving lives.
So that means barbecues of lots of friends or even family, extended family coming together to celebrate. One-year-old birthday parties and all these sorts of things. We can't do those things now.
Olivia, there's still an ongoing debate about school safety. There's still to remain open.
Yeah, Scott Morrison insisting that it is still safe for children to go to school, despite Victoria bringing forward their school holidays this week. New South Wales parents urged to keep children home if possible. The Prime Minister has met with unions this morning who want teachers given the option of working from home, though he maintains schools must remain open for children whose parents are working.
I do not want parents to have to decide between working and earning an income to feed their families and educating their children. That is not a fair decision to put on parents.
Now, tonight, the National Cabinet will meet again to discuss relief for people who are renting, with many Australian tenants now facing financial hardship. Anne?
Olivia Leeming in Canberra. Thank you, Olivia. And the Prime Minister is holding a media conference in a few minutes. We'll cross live to Canberra to hear what he has to say. The temperature, meanwhile, is rising over the Sydney cruise ship scandal that saw coronavirus-infected passengers allowed to disembark from the Ruby Princess. Our reporter Evan Batten is at Circular Quay. Evan, there's a major blame game going on.
Oh, good morning, Anne. Isn't this just the last thing anyone needed to see play out so publicly? A stoush between federal and state agencies. This time, it's the Australian Border Force chief giving both barrels to New South Wales Health over the Ruby Princess debacle last week. He says his officers were not qualified to do medical checks on passengers, and nor was he told to hold any of the passengers back. We know 2,700 passengers and 2,700 people got off this cruise ship last Thursday morning and were allowed to go without so much as a temperature check, without being told to go into isolation for 14 days. Two very crucial steps that were overlooked. They were allowed to go home to around New South Wales, around the country and around the world. And at last count, we had more than 130 of those passengers so far have tested positive, and they're just the ones we know about within Australia. We know that a third of that number are now overseas. We will possibly never know how many of them test positive and how many of them pass coronavirus on to other people. Let's take a listen to what the Border Force chief had to say a short time ago.
On the 18th of March again, the Department of Agriculture informed the agent for Ruby Princess that New South Wales Health had conducted a pre-risk assessment of the vessel and regarded it as low risk, that New South Wales Health were not boarding the vessel, they decided they didn't need to attend the vessel, and had New South Wales Health had also given clearance for all passengers to disembark the vessel.
Now, Anne, I'm down here at the Overseas Passenger Terminal where we were expecting to see another cruise ship dock this morning, the Carnival Spirit. 400 crew on board. We were told yesterday that one of them had symptoms of coronavirus and they were waiting to see the test results before bringing that ship in here. Well, no, even though that test result came back negative, there's still been no sign of it here docking this morning. No sign of the other 8 vessels that were due in here in the coming days either. Perhaps a real indication of just how heated this whole debate has become.
Vastly different scene there today, Evan. Thank you very much. New South Wales cases have now passed the 1,000 threshold, with the state recording its first coronavirus cases in children aged under 10. Chris Reason joins us from Sydney. Chris, the Premier is pleading with people to self-isolate if they've been overseas or exposed to the virus.
Yeah, good morning to you. And look, she's hammering home that message again in light of the fact that so many people across the state and indeed through Sydney seem to be ignoring the lockdown rules overnight. Again, saying that they would step up enforcement and monitoring there as the numbers here in New South Wales spike again. Record jumps again, 211 overnight, taking it above 1,000 to 1,029 confirmed cases. Now, let's put that in perspective. Just 4 days ago, Australia passed that 1,000 mark. So now the state itself has moved into that same territory just 4 days later. Now, among those, sad news that we have a 2-month-old baby diagnosed with coronavirus and also a 7-year-old child as well. The first 2 cases in New South Wales are under 10 years old. Both of them, though, doing fine, we're told, as most kids around the world who are diagnosed with the disease are, both in self-quarantine at home with their families. Now, also adding to what the Prime Minister was saying last night about at-home social distancing, barbecues, dinner parties, birthday parties, that sort of thing. The Premier was asked today what numbers we should put on that in terms of at-home policy, and she is saying that she's recommending people reconsider any gatherings at all outside immediate family. Let's take a listen.
We're not recommending anybody have indoor entertaining of any number. We recommend that immediate family members or close loved ones or people you associate with regularly are allowed into your home, and we don't recommend anything beyond that because the risk of spread is too high.
Difficult days there for families with kids and school holidays approaching. No more play dates, effectively. Now, she also confirmed the news about the tracking of mobile phones and apps that will basically spy on people who are supposed to be in self-quarantine. The government's seriously looking at rolling out some technologies very shortly. The police also telling us today that they had yesterday 250 calls to Crime Stoppers, neighbours dobbing in people for breaking those lockdown laws and gathering together. The police saying they will get even more proactive on that and be looking throughout the city and the state to stop people coming together. Anne.
Fair enough. Chris Reason reporting. Thank you, Chris. Coronavirus cases have spiked in Victoria with more than 400 people testing positive overnight. Melina Saris is in Melbourne. Melina, Victoria could see even stricter shutdown measures very soon.
Yes, they could, Anne. As you said, Victoria's coronavirus cases jumped again overnight. 55 people tested positive in the past 24 hours, bringing our state's total to 466. Premier Daniel Andrews has warned we will see even stricter shutdown measures in Victoria very soon. Stage 2 is being implemented today, but there will be a Stage 3. The Premier has begged Victorians to stay home. He says the more people ignore the advice, the more this virus will continue to spread.
If this gets away from us, our health system will be overrun, and people won't just be queuing for Centrelink payments, they'll be queuing for heart-lung machines and ventilators and intensive care beds.
More businesses were forced to close their doors today as part of that shutdown, leaving hundreds more people out of a job. We were out at Centrelinks around Melbourne again this morning, where beauty therapists have now joined the queue along with event and hospitality workers to try and get some help. There has been a lot of confusion about government assistance. The MyGov website was overloaded and crashed, forcing more people into these queues. The boss of Centrelinks says the queuing is unnecessary and people will be able to get accustomed customer reference number over the phone in the next 24 hours. Anne?
Yeah, the shocking scenes. Melina Saris in Melbourne. Thank you very much, Melina. As the world deals with the coronavirus pandemic, Olympic officials have finally made the decision to postpone the Tokyo Games until next year. Live now to sports editor Jim Wilson. Good morning, Jim. Confirmation today of what you've been reporting for some time now.
Well, I think it was inevitable. I think it just wasn't feasible, Anne, and I think certainly a hook-up this morning between the Japan Prime Minister and also the President of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach. They were resigned to the fact that the Games simply can't proceed on July 24 and the Paralympics on August 25. Athletes' preparations have been in lockdown. They've been severely disrupted. Drug testing's been compromised. There was simply no choice as far as the Games organisers and the IOC. They were going to wait a few more weeks, Anne. They've brought that forward to earlier today. Let's have a listen to what Australian Olympic Committee Chief Executive Matt Carroll had to say a short time ago in Sydney, and then Thomas Bach, the IOC President.
It's a challenging moment in history, tragic times globally, but athletes and sports now have absolute clarity that enables them to focus on a Games in 2021. The AOC recognises that the Games organisers have an enormous task.
We are facing an unprecedented challenge again now because this postponement is the first ever postponement of Olympic Games in Olympic history.
So a number of athletes I've spoken to this morning, they're disappointed, obviously. They have to reset now for another 12 months. Tokyo 2020 becomes Tokyo 2021. We should also make this point before I hand back to you, Anne, that 60% of our team, the Australian team, that had qualified for the Games in 4 months' time, it looks as though that will stand for 12 months' time. So they won't have to go through the whole qualification process again. But right now, as I said, common sense prevails, welfare and athlete sort of health is paramount in all this, and I think the IOC and the Japan government, common sense has prevailed on a number of fronts. As I said, the Olympics and Paralympics both postponed to 2021. Anne.
Some good news there for our athletes. Thank you very much, Jim Wilson. Good to talk to you. Coming up next in 7 News, we'll have a media conference from the Prime Minister, live from Canberra.
In the race to respond to coronavirus, 7 News will keep you up to date.
We have new information, new facts.
From the moment you wake,
Australia's most comprehensive guide to the coronavirus.
With the nation's leading coverage at 6 p.m.
Inside access to one of the nation's most important facilities.
For the latest into the evening.
It's a lot of money, but is it enough?
And online 24/7.
We're in this for the long haul.
For the most definitive source to help you prepare, turn to 7 News.
Ladies and gentlemen, get ready, dog. Get ready. Ready, set, jump to the rhythm as hard as you can go. Ready, set, get ready.
It's tax time. Stimulate your business now. Check your business's eligibility for the government instant asset write-off. Purchases made before June 30. The Ram 1500 pickup truck eats utes for breakfast.
Don't let this great offer pass you by. Get paid the best towed price on all Exactas, Quinellas, Trifectas, First Falls and Quaddies every Saturday in Melbourne and Sydney this autumn carnival. Bet easy. Raise your game.
Jenny Craig is here to help you lose weight the healthy way.
I loved having a consultant, and 30 kilos later I can show that it's been extremely successful.
Join today with a free 8-week membership plus free food delivery. Cost of food additional.
Call Jenny Craig now.
Get gut fit with Australia's #1 voted digestive health product for 2020. Nutrilife Gut Relief from Chemist Warehouse. The combination of prebiotics, digestive herbs and gut-loving nutrients may help relieve constipation and indigestion. Right now at Chemist Warehouse, Nutrilife Gut Relief Powder 180 grams is $25.99. So get gut fit with Nutrilife Gut Relief. Live, look, feel well at Chemist Warehouse.
We're now being joined by the rest of the Seven and Prime Network for the latest on the coronavirus crisis. After announcing tough new restrictions to combat coronavirus last night, the Prime Minister is about to address the media in Canberra. Seven's political editor Mark Riley joins us now from Canberra. Mark, what is the Prime Minister likely to say in this hastily convened press conference?
Yeah, good morning, Anne. Look, I'm expecting the Prime Minister to announce a new expert advisory body to advise the government during this pandemic on anticipating what's about to happen and how to deal with it. It's to be called the COVID-19 Coordination Commission, a very bureaucratic name, and it will help legislators anticipate and then deal with the economic and social effects of the pandemic, and that presumably would include everything from better provisions to deal with the sudden and mass layoffs caused by the tightening of restrictions on businesses and individuals that we've seen over recent days, financial relief for those in crisis, also the health implications, the direction of health resources, if you like, the supply of essential equipment from face masks to ventilators and so forth at our hospitals. The management of elective surgery lists is crucial, perhaps encouraging people who have now been scheduled to have elective surgery to postpone that so as to free up hospital beds in preparation for the coming rush of patients who will be in need of intensive care as this virus spreads. I also expect him to further explain some of those new restrictions, and that he put in place last night after the National Cabinet meeting with state leaders, premiers and chief ministers advising people not to leave their homes unless absolutely necessary, no social gatherings at home, barbecues, birthday parties, dinner parties and the like, limiting weddings to 5 people, the bride, the groom, celebrant and 2 witnesses, and limiting funerals to 10 people. Also closing food halls in shopping malls but shops remaining open, restricting hairdressers and barbers to visits of 30 minutes, which means colours are essentially out. We'll all have to go grey gracefully, I guess, for the time being, Anne. And,
you can buy it over the counter, Ravs.
Yes, is that right, Anne?
While the shops are still open.
I'm not in that market, as you probably noticed, but also closing play centres, some indoor and outdoor markets, museums, libraries, beauty therapy shops and non-essential massage, so therapeutic massage and other physiotherapists and so forth remain in practice. An overseas travel ban now was a recommendation before last night, now a total ban on overseas travel, and also interestingly a crackdown on profiteering, people jacking up the prices of goods at this time as people get into a panic buying mode, and also people buying up goods to sell overseas and profit themselves. Also last night, Anne, there was some discussion between the premiers and state territory ministers about nationalising, rationalising and coordinating the closure of state borders. Some states have closed their borders, others haven't, and one suspects that the big states, New South Wales and Victoria, will follow the leads eventually of Tasmania, South Australia and Western Australia and Queensland, and move towards a more nationalised system, which would make sense. Right. And that is the stage 2 last night, and we're moving, I guess, now to a more complete lockdown, which would be stage 3 or perhaps stage 4. Anne.
All right, Mark Riley, I know you'll stay there. We're waiting for the Prime Minister, so stay with us, and as soon as he comes out and speaks, we will return to him. But in the meantime, let's go to our finance editor, Gemma Acton. Gemma, good morning to you. Virgin Australia has announced major cuts this morning.
Yes, and the airline group has now slashed available seats on its domestic flights by 90%. It's grounding 125 planes and standing down 8,000 of its 10,000 staff from Friday until at least June 14. Its budget subsidiary Tiger Air will also be suspended immediately until further notice. Investors have actually applauded this decision. Virgin's shares are up around 15% this morning amid a buoyant overall market. The ASX 200 jumped by 6% out of the gates. It's now pulled back a little and is trading around 3.5% higher. We have Wall Street to thank for that surge. Overnight, the Dow Jones soared by more than 11%, its biggest rise since 1933. That was due to a huge bout of monetary stimulus from the Federal Reserve and the promise of a very significant stimulus package from the US government. The improvement in sentiment around the world is also supporting our local currency. It's now buying 59.5 US cents.
Gemma, we're about to hear from the Prime Minister. How important are announcements like this to the financial markets in the middle of the day?
Oh, and look, it depends. A lot of the movements on the markets now are being driven by what's happening overseas. Our share market, of course, is very interconnected to global share markets around the world. So the surge we're seeing today is reflecting what we saw on Wall Street overnight rather than many of the announcements that came out of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday. Clearly, the announcements from the Prime Minister's speech yesterday will be bad for many businesses and reduce their revenue power, reduce their earnings power. Nonetheless, we've seen a huge bounce this morning. So yes, the speeches are significant. The most significant thing for the share market overall is what's happening on the health side. So yes, it's great to see a bounce this morning and shares move higher after the last 6 weeks that we've had. But on the other hand, until we know that we're really moving through this crisis, that we look like we're getting on top of the number of cases, that's slowing down, and there could be an end to this in sight. That's when we really start to see the share market bottom out and a proper rebound underway.
All right, Gemma Acton reporting from our newsroom there on what's happening on the financial markets. Thank you very much. Chris Reason, our reporter, is in Sydney. Chris, so many major changes to the Australian way of life because of this virus. Tell us, where are you and what's it like where you are at the moment?
Yeah, look, Anne, that's right. Well, there's supposed to be so many major changes, but the problem that state authorities in New South Wales, where we are, is that they're saying that people aren't simply getting the message and acting on that message. Fair enough, we're only 24, 48 hours in now from when Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, announced that stage 2 raft of measures locking down so many of our lifestyle activities in this country, from the weddings and the funerals that Mark spoke of earlier, the auctions, the auction houses, the open houses, nail bars, salons, those sorts of things, massage, sports, swimming pools. The list goes on and on. But yesterday, when we tracked through Sydney, all over the city, people were flouting those rules, either ignoring them or simply didn't know about them, because, to be fair, a lot of people are saying that they have had a lot of confusion from the multiple messages in short and swift time from both our federal and state authorities. They're confused, to put it simply and bluntly, not sure where they're allowed to go, where they're allowed to sit, how many people should be in the groups that they are congregating with. Look, that message will be hammered home, and again, as we saw from the Premier this morning, that message was repeated and repeated by both her and also the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kerry Chant, and then also the Deputy Commissioner, Gary Warboys, saying that the police would be helping reinforce that message. As I mentioned earlier, 250 reports they had yesterday. Warboys said that it is doubling by the day, the number of people who are ringing the Crime Stoppers hotline and saying, look, I can see this cafe is still serving multiple people, send a patrol down. Warboys saying that they are sending more and more police out. At this stage, just gentle reminders to enforce those stage 2 restrictions, to break people up, to have that 4 square metre boundary around them, to not have gatherings inside food courts, cafes, restaurants, all that sort of thing. All food operations effectively simply takeaway right now. But the Deputy Commissioner did warn that at some stage, and some stage soon, the police will start coming down much harder. A reminder of the penalties that are involved here: 11 months of 6 months of imprisonment, or $11,000 in fine for breaking those social health measures and laws that the Premier has been telling us about these last 2 weeks. But look, a lot ahead of the state government to try and get a message through. They're trying, as we know, to stop the spread of this virus and flatten that curve, Anne.
Major job for our police, isn't it, Chris? Take it easy out there on the roads. Thank you very much. We're waiting for the Prime Minister to hold a media conference live from Canberra. Seven's political editor, Mark Riley, joins us now. Mark, unprecedented times and especially sobering, the scenes that we're seeing outside Centrelink right around the country as thousands of people lose their jobs overnight.
Unprecedented times indeed, Anne, and unprecedented challenges for governments, but you still expect governments to anticipate the sort of scenes we saw on the streets on Monday, and particularly yesterday, having seen Monday, that the decisions taken on the weekend by governments cause those actions. Here's the Prime Minister now to address the media.
Morning, everyone. Last night I had to announce on behalf of the National Cabinet some very difficult changes that we have asked Australians to make, and in many cases in relation to the operation of businesses, some very difficult changes, which means that they will need to close their doors, and that also means that their staff will no longer be able to turn up to work and have employment. These are very difficult changes that we're asking Australians to make. I want to assure all Australians again that these decisions are not being made by premiers and chief ministers and myself lightly. We are very mindful of the impact. We are also very mindful that you're receiving a lot of information, and we are moving as quickly as we can, but also seeking to be understanding of the need for Australians to be able to absorb this information and make the changes in their daily lives, and to talk to their family and friends and their employers and others about that. So this is a time of significant change, and I want to thank all Australians for the spirit in which they're receiving this information and working hard to ensure that they can adapt that to their daily routines and their daily lives. I've said all throughout this that there will be many months ahead of this, and we are seeking to do things that are sustainable, so we can keep doing them, not just now, not just for a week or two, that we keep doing them month after month after month to ensure that we can all get through this together. So again, I want to thank the Premiers and Chief Ministers who have all been out this morning and been providing further explanation to the points and announcements that I made last night. We are very conscious of the great cost of these measures and the impact on the daily lives of Australians. And we are there with you, and we will continue to be, to explain these as best as we can, and the states and territories will be seeking to do everything they can to ensure they're followed, because we do these things, we save lives. We do these things, we can save more livelihoods. We do these things and it sets us up even better to get on this bridge to the other side of the recovery and to be able to make sure that that's as strong as it possibly can be. Now, National Cabinet is meeting again this evening. It is meeting to pick up on the items that we were unable to get to last night. I am not planning at this point to be holding any media conference this evening after that meeting, as it is largely dealing with matters that are in process, are in train. And so tonight it is not our intention to be making any further announcements about those types of issues that we addressed last night. It was a very lengthy discussion, as you can imagine, and we thought it was important that we break the meeting to ensure that I could convey the decisions on those important behavioural changes, and particularly the issues of the closure of premises in all of the categories that I announced. There are many challenges we are facing now, which we've already discussed, but there are going to be many more. And some of them yet haven't even revealed themselves as to what the nature of those challenges are going to be. What, as a government, we've been seeking to do is put in place the right advice, the right structures, the right disciplines, the right processes to ensure that we can make the best possible decisions that can stick and will ensure that we can best manage this crisis, as I described it last night, a twin crisis. A crisis on a health front, which is also causing a crisis in the economy as well, and both of them can be equally as deadly, both in terms of the lives of Australians and their livelihoods. The purpose is to have these structures enable us to save lives and livelihoods, to cushion the impact, to build a bridge to the other side, and get everyone across that bridge together. The National Security Committee Task Force on COVID-19, which meets very regularly to make decisions about what the federal government needs to do. For example, the ban on people travelling overseas, which will be in place, as I understand, by midday today. The National Cabinet, Premiers, Chief Ministers, doing all they can to work together like we have never ever seen before with states and territories. And sure, there may be the odd time where there might be a bit of difference at the edge, but I can tell you in my entire working life, in public life, I have never seen the states and territories work together like they are working together right now, and I thank them for that. The National Cabinet is an essential gathering, and it is all of our preference to keep that consistency and common action together as much as is possible. But we also need to recognise that in some places, states and territories are in different situations to other parts of the country. A very good example of that is the Northern Territory. It is a very unique set of circumstances in the Northern Territory, particularly as it relates to remote communities, Indigenous communities. So while we seek to get consistency across the country, there will always be exceptions or differences based on those circumstances in those states and territories. We also have the economic advice that comes through to us from the Reserve Bank and from Treasury and other members of the Council of Financial Regulators, ASIC and APRA, those bodies which are feeding up information and advice to us in all of these bodies, the National Cabinet, the Expenditure Review Committee, our Cabinet and the National Security Task Force. That work has been important to define the economic responses. And of course there is the medical expert panel. You keep hearing it referred to as the AHPPC. It is the panel of medical experts, doctors who work in public health in all the states and territories and the Commonwealth, who are providing the expert medical advice together to the National Cabinet and to our respective governments. But there is another area, and I'm joined by Neville Power here today, Nev Power, as we know, that we believe needs greater coordination. And that's why today I'm announcing the establishment of a National COVID-19 Coordination Commission. That commission's job, put simply, is to solve problems. Problems that require the private sector working together with the private sector. CEOs to talk to CEOs and to be engaged with by CEOs to ensure that the private-to-private effort is there solving problems in the national interest and it's being mobilised. It's about the private sector working together with the public sector. It's about better coordinating the efforts that are happening within the public sector. And to do that, we have been operating with what has been called the National Coordinating Mechanism, but that is essentially being done by governments, between governments at a state and federal level. Whether it's repurposing manufacturing lines, whether it's retasking workforces that one day were taking calls for travel companies, now taking calls at Centrelink, and ensuring that we're repurposing the workforce effort. There will be many other problems that need to solve. And Nev Power I have appointed as Executive Chairman of that Commission to help us solve those problems and work through them with all arms of government, right across government, working with states and territories, some of whom have also put in place similar arrangements to ensure we can get these problems sorted, whether it's ensuring we get food to supermarkets and we ensure the supply lines remain open there, and the trucks can roll out when they need to roll out, and we have enough of them to do that job at all the right times. These are the many challenges that we need to face. Now, Nev Power was the former head of the Fortescue Minerals Group. He has a great experience in doing just this task. If you're working in the mining sector, you need to know how to solve problems, and big ones. There are only big issues in the mineral sector. And it's great that Neville, when I rang him the other day, I simply said, Nev, I need you to serve your country. And he quickly responded. In the same way that the Commissioner of our Bushfire Recovery Agency, AJ Colvin, asked him the same question. I need you to serve your country. And he's stepped up. And that's what Nev has agreed to do in leading this new commission. There will be a board that will be appointed, and we already have sitting on that board a number of eminent Australians who will be working with Nev to help guide this problem-solving task, and there'll be others who will be added to this board. The other members of this board are Greg Combet, Jane Holton, who formerly, Greg Combet, everyone will know, I think, quite well. Jane Holton, I'm sure many of you know, but she now sits on a number of boards outside. She has previously served extensively within the Australian Public Service and in her last role as the head of the Finance Department. Mr Paul Little, who used to head up Toll and has a great understanding of how to deal with the many logistical issues that will be present as we go forward. Catherine Tanner, who heads up Energy Australia. Kath also sits on the Reserve Bank of Australia board and is very experienced in the energy sector, but also has a very good handle on what's happening in the financial sector as well. And the Deputy Chair of the organisation will be Mr David Thodey. David also heads up as chair of the CSIRO, but of course as former head of Telstra, and a deep corporate experience means that together they will be able to reach out and into corporate Australia to solve problems on behalf of the nation, working together with the states and territories. Now, the board will be joined by Phil Gaetjens as the Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and the Secretary of the Home Affairs Department, Mike Pizzullo, who was currently running the National Coordinating Mechanism. That will continue to function, and it will plug straight into this new commission to ensure we're getting the advice. They will come to us and say, Prime Minister, we need to do this. We need you to authorise this. We recommend that you take this action to get these problems sorted. And so I want to give Australians confidence that we've got the best people in this country working to solve the problems and the challenges that are going to confront us so we all get through to the other side. And I want to thank you, Nev, for taking on this role, and all of the other members of the Commission's board and all of those who are going to be working with them, and will be making further appointments, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, to see how we can mobilise that effort as well. Before I throw to Nev to make a number of comments, and we can take a few questions today, we had a lot of questions last night and we have a fairly busy agenda today. I also need to note another decision that we confirmed this morning amongst the Premiers and Chief Ministers, and that is that the National Cabinet has endorsed the advice of the medical expert panel, the AHPPC, that from today, midnight, the 25th of March, until further notice, all elective surgery other than Category 1 and urgent, I stress very urgent Category 2 cases will be suspended. This will apply in both the public and the private hospital systems. Cancellation of elective surgery will allow the preservation of resources, including personal protective equipment, and allow health services, private and public, to prepare for their role in the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, this had already largely been implemented for Category 1 and Category 2, and what this means is a further scaling back of those elective surgeries in Category 2. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Nev, and then we can take some further questions.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and thanks everyone. As the Prime Minister mentioned, I've stepped up to this role when he asked me to do it because I think Australia right now, more than anything, needs to focus on minimising and mitigating the impact of the coronavirus on our businesses, on our communities, on our people, and that's through the preservation of jobs as much as we possibly can, given the constraints that we have around the restrictions from the coronavirus. So my role is going to be looking for those problems and looking for opportunities where we can join businesses together to solve two problems, where there is a workforce that is no longer gainfully employed and where there's a workforce that is needed, where there's equipment that can be redeployed, where we need to intervene to protect our critical supply chains and our utilities, and also, very importantly, looking to the future, because we know that this virus will come and go, and we want to be well positioned to make sure that we restore people's jobs and livelihood as quickly as we possibly can afterwards. So our priority is to identify those areas, ask people for their help and look for coordination across all of those areas to minimise the impact of this virus.
Thank you, Nev. Just before we come to that, also there's some important information I wanted to relay on testing. My morning brief this morning has Australia at 162,747 tests for COVID-19. Now, to put this in perspective, the tests by 100,000 population for Australia is 5 times, almost 5 times, 4.7 in fact, what it is in the United Kingdom. It is 25 times what it is in the United States. It is even higher now than in the Republic of Korea, and puts Australia right at the top of that leaders board in terms of the amount of testing that we're undertaking in Australia. This is a very important statistic because it shows that those testing resources we are securing and we are continuing to deploy. The testing and the contact tracing is the most important jobs we have as governments to ensure that we can best manage this virus, and to, supported by all the other measures, ensure we can reduce the peak impacts that we are so determined to do in managing the virus in the community. Andrew.
Will you consider a scheme like Boris Johnson's, where he provides money to distressed businesses so they can keep their workers on the bridge until we get to the other side?
Well, two things. We are already providing money to businesses through the BAS arrangements, and one of the weaknesses of the system that you're advocating for is that it has to build an entirely new payment system for that to be achieved, which is never done quickly and is never done well. And that would put at great risk the sort of resources we're trying to get to people. The best way to get help to people is through the existing payment channels, through the existing tax system arrangements. That was the lesson from the GFC. Of all the money that went out in the GFC, and I'm not making a partisan point here, the key lesson was you must use existing channels for getting money to people because that is the most effective way for that to occur. To dream up other schemes can be very dangerous.
Even if it means more job losses, Prime Minister?
No, well, I don't accept that at all, and that is not the advice of Treasury either. That is completely inconsistent with the advice of Treasury. See, what we're doing is keeping as many businesses as we possibly can open. And then what we're doing for those businesses that close, because of the many measures, in fact, that we're putting in place, we are ensuring a stronger safety net for all of those who are impacted by that. Businesses will close because of the restrictions we have put in place. There will be no jobs in those businesses. And so what we want to ensure is that the Australians who are affected by that, and the businesses indeed that are affected by that they can get a lifeline and a safety net that will help them through. Because if you lose your job and you earn $150,000, or if you lose your job and you earn $50,000, or your job is at risk on those two different levels, then I'm ensuring that both of those people get the same support.
Will you waive mutual obligation?
I think this isn't a one-on-one interview, Andrew.
Will you waive mutual obligation?
PM,
I addressed that last night.
Communications, logistics, transport will all be important. The Department of Defence does that very well. So what role do you envisage for the Department of Defence?
They're already playing a role. They're already involved, particularly in logistics issues and the repurposing of supply chains on PPE, masks and things of that nature. And I want to commend Minister Andrews, Karen Andrews, for the amazing job she's been doing around that effort, working together with the Minister for Defence. Defence personnel are already involved in contract tracing and surging workforce support into state governments to help them with those tasks. Logistics support from the military will also be available, and the many other tasks that they can be involved in, which were on great display during the bushfire crisis. And all of those resources will be at the disposal of the National Coordination Commission for Coronavirus, and they will be plugging in heavily with this work with Nev.
Prime Minister. In your opening remarks last night and again today that the situation is slightly different in some of the states. Is it conceivable that New South Wales and Victoria could move ahead to further restrictions at a faster pace than other states?
Well, the preference of all states and territories is to ensure as much consistency as possible, because it is absolutely true that the situation in New South Wales is different to that in Victoria and to that of Western Australia, and in particular the Northern Territory and Tasmania. And where possible, they are seeking to ensure a consistent approach. But the issue of hitting higher thresholds and other measures is a matter that is being discussed by the National Cabinet. But be assured that if additional measures are required for different parts of the country, there would be no resistance to that occurring. What it would be hard, I think, for some Australians to get their heads around is why a particular measure might be introduced in Melbourne but not in Adelaide, and that could cause some confusion for people living in Adelaide. It could also mean that if some states were to go ahead and other states were forced to follow, then that could cause needless economic loss in those states as well. See, we're managing two crises, an economic one and a health one, and they are impacting on our country in different ways across the country. Yeah.
Last night you told Australians to stay home except for essential school, work, grocery shopping, health or exercise. This morning the government texted people who are sick to stay home. While obviously it's more urgent that sick people get that message, don't you think that lack of detail this morning undermines the very clear advice you gave last night?
No, it doesn't, because it was consistent with the advice. The most urgent message that we're getting for people to stay home is to stay home if you're sick. That is the most important, urgent message. It is also important that people should stay home when they're in self-isolation. And as I said last night, our preference and our instruction is more generally stay home unless you're going out for essential. But the most dangerous thing you can do, and we know of people who are sick and have sought to go to pharmacies, and that is very dangerous. And so the most important part of the message that we're seeking to get out is that message. There will be more messages. I mean, just last night, you were criticising the government for not having a text messaging service, and here it is first thing this morning, and I knew that was taking place. So I'd ask the media to be patient. We're obviously getting to these issues, and I appreciate there'll be criticism from time to time. But that message is very clear. The message we gave last night was very clear. There will be more messages that come out using those sort of mechanisms, and we are further upgrading that capability.
Prime Minister, there are still some people today who are a little bit confused. Parents, do I send my kid to school, do I not? Some small businesses who don't fall very specifically into some of those categories. The categories in terms of I should close. So maybe a small jeweller or a nursery for plants and so on. People just are still confused what to do. Would just a lockdown for a time be a good idea so that unequivocally it's clear we need to just all lock down, we need to control this now?
Well, you're suggesting I should close down businesses where there's no medical advice that they should. I don't understand why we would cause that harm to a business and all their workers and their livelihoods for the sake of some sort of message convenience. I think that would be quite reckless. What we're seeking to do is put in place measures on a scalable basis. Now, last night I gave a very clear list of those businesses that were unable to continue in their premises because of the risk of the spread of coronavirus. Now, our advice is not to extend that more broadly within the retail sector. People can still go to car yards. They can still do those things where it's necessary for them to do that. And those businesses are expected to put in place the arrangements I talked about last night, which is the 4 square metres per person, how many people can be in that premise. And what I was trying to stress last night is the government is taking these decisions together with the states and territories very seriously. We are not going to do things to a business or someone's job and livelihood where at this stage that may and is not necessary. And so when we do make those decisions, and if we do make those decisions, you can have the confidence that it's not been done in some sort of cavalier way to just suit the convenience of messaging. That's not my priority. My priority is to protect Australian lives and protect their livelihoods and to make this information as clear as I can. Kath, last question.
Prime Minister, just picking up from Phil's question, the Victorian Premier this morning in his press conference said there would be stage 3 lockdowns, not today, but they're coming. And he said that it was basically understood now in the National Cabinet that there were differences between the states. And his clear inference was that Victoria and New South Wales would move ahead of other states to implement stage 3 lockdowns. Is that your expectation? And would, I think you said a minute ago, there wouldn't be resistance, but I'm just wanting to be clear. Is it your expectation that New South Wales and Victoria will move ahead of other states?
Ultimately, the National Cabinet is not a compulsory mechanism. That's not how our federation is built. It's not what our constitution provides for. It is, I think, the preference of all the National Cabinet that wherever possible they can move together and they can move together in a consistent way. But there is also an important discussion about where other states are under more extreme circumstances, that measures that may be required there more urgently may be less urgent in other parts of the country. So there is a real discussion about how those issues can be addressed, but I can assure everyone that no measure has been restrained from in any state or territory. If any state or territory felt they needed to take those more urgent actions, then I know they would do it through the National Cabinet, and they would not seek to do it unilaterally, but they'd seek to do it in partnership and cooperation with other states and territories. Now, on the issue of schools, I could say that this morning I had a very positive discussion with the National Education Union. We're working through those issues, and the points I'd make briefly about that to you is simply this, that we recognise absolutely just how important teachers are in dealing with this crisis. When I think about teachers, I'm thinking about them in the same way that I'm thinking about paramedics, about nurses, about doctors, about, frankly, those who are trying to upgrade the capabilities of Centrelink and things of that nature. These are critical people in our community at this time, and it's very important that we work with teachers to ensure that their workplace health and safety is being addressed as we manage this very difficult issue. School is not as usual anymore. That's clear. We all accept that. And school won't be as usual going into the future. That's important. but we must have an orderly transition that ensures that workers, and as I said last night, an essential worker is a worker with a job, because I don't want any parent to have to choose between putting food on the table for their kids and for their kids getting an education. That is not a choice I want any parent in this country to have to make. And so we are working with the National Education Union. We will be having further discussions with them to work through these issues. I thank them for their cooperation today and the very good spirit that they and many other unions around the country are working together with us, and I have no doubt, particularly working with Greg Combet and Nev as part of that process, they will be critical going forward as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.
And that's where we'll leave the press conference from Prime Minister Scott Morrison, mindful of a lot of information that he's giving to us all, and thanking the Chief Ministers and the Premiers for coming together, conscious of the great cost of our way of life, and most importantly today announcing a new National Commission, an advisory board led by Neville Powell. Let's bring in our political editor, Mark Riley. Mark, Scott Morrison has set up this new commission a bit like a war cabinet, I guess you can say, headed by a man who's well known to people from WA in the mining industry, Mr Neville Powell.
Yes, and it's an interesting move in that it really formalises the strands of advice that the government's been getting since the beginning of this crisis from outside of government, and an acknowledgement that governments and their leaders, whether they're the Prime Minister or the State Premier or a territory leader, aren't the font of all wisdom, and that the people outside the political process have good ideas about this. So formalising that in this COVID-19 Coordination Commission headed, as you say, by Nev Powell, formerly Fortescue Metals CEO, including Greg Combet, the former Labor Minister for Climate Change, but also an ACTU Secretary, Jane Halton, the former and very respected bureaucrat, head of the Departments of Health for a long time, and then the Finance Department, David Thodey, the former head of Telstra, and a couple of others from the transport industry, and also an RBA, Catherine Tanner from the RBA. So it's a high-powered commission, and Scott Morrison said this was part of the process of improving the communication between business and business and government, so the private sector and the public sector, on how to anticipate the issues and stresses and challenges that this pandemic is going to create in our community, and then how to best deal with them. So really broadening the field of advice into government and getting a collective now machinery, if you like, of advice and to the leaders as they go through this crisis. A couple of other things there too from Scott Morrison. His key message today was that the purpose of this, if you were to give it a headline, is to save lives and save livelihoods, which tells you about the balance that leaders are striking, particularly the Prime Minister, in making regulations that affect the protection of people's health and other regulations that affect the protection of their wealth, and getting those balances right. The government says that health is primary, but they also have an eye to ensuring that the economy maintains some sort of a heartbeat, and that people are able to survive throughout this process financially, and also building that bridge, as we've heard in the last few days, to get to the other side. When we do get to the other side, that we're able to get back into jobs and get productivity rising fairly swiftly. A couple of other announcements there from the Prime Minister that were quite interesting, and when you think about the elective surgery announcement that we prefaced before his press conference, now that all elective surgery other than Category 1 and urgent Category 2 surgeries should be postponed or cancelled, and that is to free up the hospital system for the anticipated onslaught of patients coming who need particular and intensive care because of this virus. So that is a practical measure. He also there said that the number of tests that have been conducted in Australia is now the most per capita in the world, over 160,000, and quite proud of that fact, Anne.
All right, we'll leave you there. Mark Riley in Canberra, thank you very much for that summation.
Pleasure.
And that is 7 News to Now. We'll keep you up to date throughout the day. Our next bulletin is at 4 p.m, and we'll have all the new details on the coronavirus in the news at 6 o'clock. I'm Anne Sanders. Thanks for your company. I hope you have a good day.
Hi, I'm Ben Cousins.